The war had taken everything from him. Even the memory of warm water. Germany, April 1945. The town of Eisenfeld sat under a gray morning sky, quiet in the strange way places became quiet after war moved through them. Roofs sagged. Windows stared empty into the street. Brick dust clung to the wind like powder. Somewhere in the distance, church bells rang, though no one remembered who still pulled the rope. 13-year-old Lucas Adler walked barefoot through the narrow road, his shoes long gone, traded months earlier for half a loaf of bread. Mud pressed between his toes, cold and sticky from last night's rain. His trousers hung loose around his legs, held up by a piece of rope. The sweater on his back belonged to his father once, before his father disappeared into the war and never returned. It was too big, heavy with the smell of smoke and old wool. But the thing Lucas noticed most was the smell on his own skin. It followed him everywhere. Sweat. Dirt. Cold dust. Weeks of sleeping in basements. Months of carrying water in rusted buckets from broken wells. Almost a year without a proper bath. At first, you stop noticing it. That's what happened to everyone. When survival became the only job, cleanliness felt like a luxury from another lifetime. But some mornings, when the wind shifted and caught his collar just right, Lucas could smell himself and remember what life used to be. Soap. Steam. Towels warming near the stove. His mother humming while she folded laundry. That world was gone now. The Adler apartment had collapsed in winter after a fire spread from the bakery next door. His mother had died from sickness before Christmas. Since then, Lucas slept wherever there was shelter. Basements. Barns. Once inside the shell of an abandoned train station, curled beneath old coats someone had left behind. Hunger was constant. Cold was constant. Dirt was constant. He moved through the ruined streets like everyone else now. Thin boys. Hollow-faced women. Old men carrying wood. The war was ending, people said. But endings didn't feel like endings when you were still hungry. Near the old fountain square, Lucas stopped. 3 boys stood huddled beside the broken stone basin, whispering. One of them, Karl Brenner, a boy with red hair and sharp elbows, spotted him. "They've got hot water," Karl said. Lucas frowned. "What?" Karl stepped closer, lowering his voice like he was telling a secret too valuable to say aloud. "The Americans. At the relief station by the schoolhouse. Showers." Lucas stared at him. Hot water. The words sounded unreal. Like something from before. Like Christmas candles. Like butter on bread. "For who?" Lucas asked. Karl shrugged. "Kids. Refugees. Anyone, I think." Another boy laughed nervously. "My cousin went yesterday. Said steam came out of the walls." Lucas almost smiled at that. Steam from walls. It sounded impossible. Propaganda had taught them many things about Americans. Cruel men. Hard voices. Strange food. Dangerous boots. But no one had mentioned hot showers. Lucas looked toward the hill where the old schoolhouse stood. A quarter mile away. Maybe less. He could almost see it through the bare trees. For a moment, he stood perfectly still, feeling the weight of dirt on his skin like an extra layer of clothing. The smell of war. The smell of surviving. And somewhere beyond that hill, people said, there was warm water waiting. Lucas stood in the square for another minute after the boys left, staring at the hill where the old schoolhouse waited behind rows of broken trees. Hot water. The word stayed in his mind like heat itself, distant and unreal. He tried to remember the last time he had stood under water that was not cold enough to sting. Maybe the summer before the war turned everything hard. Maybe when his mother still heated buckets on the stove and poured them into the tin tub by the kitchen fire. He could still hear her voice sometimes, soft and ordinary, asking him to scrub behind his ears. Back then, being clean had meant nothing. It was just life. Now it felt like a story from someone else's childhood. Lucas began walking. The streets narrowed as he climbed toward the schoolhouse. Rubble crunched under his feet. Pieces of glass flashed in the morning light like ice. Every step carried the smell of damp earth and smoke, and beneath it all, the smell of himself. The smell of sleeping. Underground. The smell of waiting out winter in places never meant for living. He passed an old woman sweeping dust from her doorstep even though the wind would bring it back in an hour. He passed 2 American trucks parked near the church, painted olive green, their engines quiet. The sight of them made his stomach tighten. He slowed. His mother's warnings came back to him. The Americans will smile, she had once said, but do not trust smiles during war. Lucas had held on to that idea because it was one of the last things she gave him. But now the war felt strange. Not over. Not alive either. Just hanging in the air like fog. Ahead, the schoolhouse looked almost untouched. White stone walls. Wide wooden doors. A flag Lucas did not recognize hanging from the front. Outside, a line had formed. Women with children. Old men. Boys his age. Some carrying towels. Some carrying nothing. Lucas stopped across the street and watched. American soldiers stood by the entrance. Not shouting. Not pushing. Just watching the line move. One of them knelt to hand an apple to a little girl no older than 6. The girl took it with both hands like it was gold. Lucas stared. Apples in spring. Real ones? His stomach tightened again, but not from fear this time. Hunger. He stepped closer, keeping his head down. As he moved toward the line, warm air brushed against his face. It came from inside the building. Warm air. He froze. Then he saw it. Steam slipping through the half-open door, curling into the cold morning like breath. Real steam. Not from fire. Not from soup. Water. A boy came out carrying a towel over his shoulders, his hair wet, his cheeks red from heat. Clean. Lucas barely recognized him at first. It was Otto Weiss, a boy from the next street over. Otto looked lighter somehow, as if the dirt had been carrying part of his weight. Otto saw Lucas and grinned. "It is real," he whispered. "Hot as summer." Lucas swallowed hard. For the first time in months, he became aware of every inch of dirt on his skin. Every layer. Every day. And standing there, with steam drifting into the sky, Lucas realized something strange. He was not afraid of the Americans anymore. He was afraid of. Hoping they might actually be kind. The line moved slowly. 10 people ahead of Lucas. Maybe 12. He stood with his hands buried deep in the pockets of his father's sweater, shoulders tight against the cold, eyes fixed on the open doorway where steam drifted into the gray air. Every few minutes someone stepped out changed. Cleaner. Straighter. Like the heat inside had done more than wash dirt away. Lucas watched an old man emerge with wet hair combed flat, and a clean shirt hanging loose over his thin frame. The man stopped on the steps and closed his eyes against the morning breeze, breathing like someone who had forgotten what fresh skin felt like. Lucas looked down at his own hands. The dirt sat deep in the cracks of his knuckles, black and stubborn. He rubbed his thumb against his palm, but nothing changed. Ahead, the line shifted again. Closer now. The warm air from inside reached him stronger this time. It smelled strange. Soap. Clean cloth. Steam. It hit him like a memory. Then he saw him. The American soldier standing beside the doorway was taller than Lucas expected, broad shoulders under a green wool jacket, sleeves rolled to his forearms. No helmet. No rifle in his hands. Just a clipboard and tired eyes. Sergeant Thomas Walker. 31 years old, from Iowa, though Lucas did not know that yet. Walker had been at the relief station since dawn, checking names, counting towels, keeping the line moving. He looked like a man who had not slept much. But there was something else in his face. Not hardness. Not anger. Just weariness. The kind Lucas recognized. Walker looked up and noticed him. Their eyes met for half a second. Lucas looked away immediately. His stomach tightened. He expected shouting. Questions. But none came. Walker simply glanced at the boy's bare feet, the oversized sweater, the thin wrists, and made a small mark on his clipboard. Then he waved the next person forward. No words. Just routine. Lucas did not understand that. The line moved again. Now he stood only 3 people from the door. Through the opening, he could hear it. Water hitting tile. Steady. Endless. A sound so ordinary once, now almost impossible. He watched a little boy. About 7 step out wrapped in a towel too big for him, hair dripping, cheeks bright red from heat. The boy smiled at his mother and laughed. Lucas could not remember the last time he heard someone laugh like that. Not careful. Not nervous. Just free. Next, Walker said. The voice was calm, low. Lucas looked up. Only one person remained ahead of him. A woman holding a baby. Walker handed her 2 towels and pointed toward the hallway inside. Then he looked at Lucas. Up close, the soldier seemed older than 31. Dust on his boots. Deep lines at the corners of his eyes. But his voice stayed even. You waiting for a shower, son? Lucas hesitated. Son. No American had ever called him that. He nodded once. Walker looked at the boy's sweater, the rope belt, the dirt layered on his neck like shadow. He reached into a crate beside the door and pulled out a folded towel. White. Thick. Cleaner than anything Lucas had touched in months. Walker held it out. Lucas stared at it, uncertain. It is yours, Walker said. Slow. Careful. As if speaking to someone fragile. Lucas took the towel with both hands. It felt heavy. Soft. Warm from being stacked near the boiler room. Walker nodded toward the hallway where steam rolled like fog. 3rd door on the left, he said. Lucas stood there for 1 second, frozen between old fear and something new. Then he stepped inside, and the door closed behind him. The hallway was warmer than anything Lucas remembered. Not warm like sunlight through broken glass. Not warm like standing too close to a fire. This was different. Soft heat. Heavy in the air. It wrapped around him the moment he stepped inside, pressing against his cold skin like a blanket. The floor beneath his bare feet was smooth stone, worn from years of shoes and water. For a second, he just stood there, holding the towel against his chest, staring at the narrow hall ahead. Steam drifted from the open doors, thick and white, turning the light into a blur. Somewhere nearby, water ran in steady streams. Not dripping. Not rationed. Flowing. Lucas moved slowly, counting the doors. 1, 2, 3. He stopped at the 3rd door on the left, just as the soldier had said. The wooden frame was chipped at the edges, but inside, the room looked almost unreal. White tile. Metal pipes. Hooks on the wall. Benches. 4 shower heads lined against the far wall, each spilling hot water into the drain below. Real hot water. Endless. Lucas stood frozen in the doorway. No one else was inside. The room belonged to him for this moment alone. He stepped in carefully, as if afraid it might disappear if he moved too fast. The steam touched his face first, warm and wet. He blinked against it. The smell was stronger here. Soap. Clean stone. Heat. It felt like stepping into another world. He set the towel on the bench and looked at the bars of soap laid out in a wooden tray. Real soap. Pale yellow. Smooth around the edges. He picked one up and held it to his nose. It smelled sharp and clean, like pine and something sweet underneath. Lucas closed his eyes. For 1 second, he was back in the kitchen at home, before the winter, before the hunger, before the silence of empty streets. His mother at the stove. Steam on the windows. Water heating in the kettle. Do not waste it, she used to say. Water had become precious long before everything else disappeared. A bucket for drinking. A bucket for washing dishes. A cup for hands and face. Bathing became memory. Lucas opened his eyes and looked at the shower. The water poured without stopping, splashing into the drain and vanishing like it cost nothing at all. He reached out carefully, holding his fingers under the stream. Heat struck his skin so suddenly he pulled back. Not because it hurt. Because it shocked him. Warm. Truly warm. He stared at his wet fingers, steam rising from them. Then he touched the water again. Longer this time. Letting it run over his hand, over the dirt, carrying tiny gray rivers into the drain. Lucas swallowed hard. Slowly, he removed his sweater, then the rope at his waist, folding everything carefully on the bench as if order still mattered. Standing there in the steam, thin and pale, ribs visible beneath skin marked by cold and hunger, he stepped forward under the shower. The water struck his shoulders first. Hot. Heavy. Real. Lucas gasped. His whole body stiffened. For 1 second, he thought he might fall. Then the heat spread. Across his neck. Down his back. Over his arms. Washing away the dust of roads, the ash of winter, the smell of basements and smoke. The dirt began to slide from him in dark lines. Lucas stood perfectly still, eyes closed, letting the water fall. Not moving. Not thinking. Just feeling what warmth felt like again. At first, Lucas did not move. He stood under the falling water like a statue, his hands hanging at his sides, his head lowered, letting the heat settle into his skin. The room filled with the sound of it. Water against tile. Water against shoulders. Water against the floor. A sound so steady it almost felt alive. For months, every sound in his life had carried warning. Boots in the street. Doors opening in the dark. Wine through broken glass. But this sound carried nothing except itself. Lucas lifted his hands slowly, and watched the dirt run from his fingers in thin gray streams. It circled the drain and disappeared. He rubbed his arms carefully, almost disbelieving what was happening. Beneath the grime, his skin looked pale again. Human again. He picked up the bar of soap and turned it over in his hand. Smooth. Solid. Not homemade. Not scraps melted together. Real soap. He pressed it against his arm and worked it across his skin. White foam appeared instantly. Lucas froze at the sight of it. Foam. Thick and white. Like snow, but warm. He stared at it, fascinated. Then he laughed. Quietly at first. Just one breath of surprise. The sound startled him. He could not remember the last time laughter had come out of him without force. He scrubbed harder. His neck. His hands. Behind his ears, just like his mother used to remind him. The memory hit so suddenly that his hands stopped moving. He stood there with soap sliding down his arm, hearing her voice again, clear as if she were standing beside him. Clean hands, Lucas. Always clean hands. His throat tightened. The water kept falling. Warm. Endless. And for the first time in a long time, Lucas let himself stop surviving for a minute. He leaned against the tile wall and let the heat press into his back. His eyes closed. Images came and went behind them. His mother folding towels. His father shaving at the sink. Steam on kitchen windows during winter mornings. Ordinary things. Lost things. The kind of memories war did not destroy, only bury. Lucas opened his eyes and looked down. The water around his feet was no longer gray. It ran clear now. Clear water. Clean skin. He touched his own arm as if checking if it was really his. It felt strange without the layer of dirt, almost lighter. He washed his hair next, working the soap through it until the lather slipped over his forehead and into his eyes. He blinked and laughed again, wiping it away. Outside the room, footsteps passed in the hallway. Voices. Doors opening and closing. The world moved on. But inside that shower room, time slowed. Minutes stretched. Lucas stayed under the water, turning his face into it, letting it run over his closed eyes, over his cheeks, over his neck. The heat reached places cold had settled into for months. Deep places. Places he had forgotten. For the first time since winter began, he was not shaking. Not from hunger. Not from cold. Not from fear. Just standing. Breathing. existing in warmth. And somewhere outside, Sergeant Thomas Walker glanced at the clock near the supply table. 20 minutes had passed. Then 30. The line had grown shorter. New people came and went. But the boy in room 3 had not come out. Walker looked toward the hallway, hearing the water still running, and frowned slightly. Not with anger. With curiosity. Because sometimes, he had learned, people stayed longer in warm water when they needed more than just cleaning. 40 minutes passed. Then 50. The line outside the relief station had disappeared, replaced by afternoon quiet and the distant rumble of supply trucks rolling through town. Inside the schoolhouse, steam still drifted under the bottom of door number 3. The water was still running. Sergeant Thomas Walker sat behind the supply table, marking inventory on his clipboard, but every few minutes his eyes lifted toward the hallway. He had seen people cry in those shower rooms before. Old women who had not felt hot water in years. Boys who stood under it until their fingers wrinkled and their lips turned pale from the heat. It was never really about bathing. It was about remembering life before everything fell apart. Still, this was longer than usual. An hour now. Walker stood up, stretched his back, and walked down the hallway. The air grew thicker with steam as he approached the door. He could hear the water falling, steady and unchanged. He knocked once, gently. "Kid?" he said. No answer. Just water. Walker waited. Knocked again. "Everything all right in there?" Silence. He looked at the floor where warm water slid beneath the crack of the door, disappearing into the hallway drain. For a moment, he wondered if the boy had fallen asleep standing up. Or fainted. Hunger and heat could do strange things to a body. Walker rested his hand against the door, thinking. Then, from inside, he heard movement. Small movement. Bare feet against tile. A voice came, quiet and uncertain. "Yes." Walker stepped back. "Take your time," he said, his voice calm. "No rush." He walked back to the front room, but the boy did not come out. Another 20 minutes passed. Then 30. Outside, the afternoon sun had shifted lower, warming the front steps in pale gold. Walker poured himself coffee from the metal pot by the stove. Cold now. Bitter. He drank it anyway. His mind drifted back to home. Iowa. Winter mornings. Hot water from the boiler, his mother yelling at him for staying too long in the bathroom before school. Funny, the things people missed in war. Not big things. Small things. Heat. Bread. Soap. Silence. He looked at the hallway clock. 1 hour and 30 minutes. The water still ran. One of the nurses working the relief station walked by carrying folded blankets. She nodded toward the hallway. "Same boy?" Walker nodded. She smiled faintly. "Let him stay." Walker looked at the steam curling at the end of the hall. "I think he needs it." The nurse adjusted the blankets in her arms. "They all do." Another 15 minutes passed. Then another. At nearly 2 hours, Walker stood again and walked back to the door. This time he did not knock right away. He just stood there, listening. The water had slowed now. Not because it was stopping. Because the boy had turned it. Lower. The sound was softer. Like rain instead of a storm. Walker knocked once. "Kid?" A pause. Then the water shut off. Silence filled the room so suddenly it felt louder than the running water had. Walker waited, staring at the door. He heard the scrape of the bench. The rustle of the towel. Slow movements. Careful movements. Like someone dressing in a world that felt new. And in that silence, Walker understood something. The boy had not stayed because he loved the water. He had stayed because it was the first place in a long time where nothing cold could reach him. The door opened slowly. Steam rolled into a hallway in one last warm breath, and Lucas stepped out holding the white towel around his shoulders like armor. For a second, Thomas Walker did not recognize him. The boy who had walked into that room 2 hours earlier had been covered in layers of dust and road grime, hair stiff with dirt, skin hidden beneath months of survival. The boy standing there now looked younger. Smaller somehow. Cleaner. Human in a way war had nearly erased. His wet hair hung dark against his forehead, and his face, scrubbed clean, showed sharp cheekbones and pale skin that had been hidden beneath soot and winter. Lucas stood barefoot on the cold stone floor, blinking at the hallway light as if it felt different now. Cleaner too. He held his folded clothes under one arm, still damp from where steam had touched them. Walker looked at him and gave a small nod. Feel better? Lucas looked down at the towel in his hands. He nodded once. Yes. His voice was almost embarrassed by the truth of it. Walker noticed the boy's hands first. Clean now, but raw at the knuckles from hard work and cold weather. Then his eyes moved lower. Lucas had rolled the sleeves of his sweater back while dressing, and Walker saw the marks on his forearms. Not wounds. Not fresh. Just old lines. Scratches. Thickened skin. The kind that came from carrying wood, hauling water, digging through rubble, surviving too young. Walker knew those hands. He had seen them on farm boys back in Iowa during the Depression. Hands that belonged to someone older than the face attached to them. Lucas shifted under his gaze. Uncomfortable. Walker looked away on purpose, giving him space. Dignity. That mattered. You eaten today? Walker asked. Lucas hesitated. Then shook his head. Not since yesterday afternoon. Walker had expected that answer. Hunger had a shape. You could see it in the way boys stood, the way their eyes lingered too long on food crates. Walker motioned for him to follow. They walked down the hall together, Lucas barefoot, towel over his shoulders, leaving faint wet footprints on the stone. In the main room, the smell of soup drifted from the kitchen corner. Thin vegetable soup. Bread. Coffee for the adults. Lucas stopped when he saw it. Real food. Warm food. Walker reached for a chair near the stove and pulled it out. Sit. Lucas sat carefully, like he was afraid someone might tell him he did not belong there. A nurse placed a bowl in front of him. Steam rose into his face. Carrots. Potatoes. Broth. Nothing fancy. But hot. Lucas stared at it. Walker noticed that too. The hesitation. The disbelief. Like the shower, the meal felt almost too generous to trust. It is yours, Walker said. The same words as before. Lucas picked up the spoon. His clean fingers shook slightly. Not from fear now. From warmth. From hunger. From something deeper. He took one bite and stopped. Closed his eyes. The heat of the soup spread through him the same way the water had. Slow. Real. Alive. Walker sat across from him, saying nothing. Watching the boy eat in silence. And Lucas, for the first time in months, understood something simple and impossible at once. Sometimes kindness did not come as words. Sometimes it came as hot water, dry towels, and soup waiting on a table. By the time Lucas finished the last spoonful of soup, the room had grown quieter. The afternoon crowd was gone. Only a few people remained near the stove, wrapped in blankets, speaking in low voices. The warmth inside the schoolhouse felt different now. Before it had felt foreign. Something borrowed. Now it felt possible. Lucas held the empty bowl in both hands, letting the last heat settle into his fingers. He had eaten slowly at first, careful, almost suspicious of every bite. But by the end, the hunger had taken over, and the soup was gone before he realized it. Thomas Walker sat across from him, elbows on the table, coffee cup in hand. Cold by now. He drank it anyway. For a while, either of them spoke. The silence was not awkward. Just still. Lucas looked at the towel around his shoulders. White. Clean. He rubbed the edge of it between his fingers. Soft cloth. He had almost forgotten softness. Walker leaned back in his chair. You got family? He asked. Lucas stared at the table for a long moment. The wood grain beneath his fingers looked smooth, untouched by ruin. No, he said finally. Just one word. Small. Flat. Walker nodded once, as if he understood more than the word itself. He did not ask more. In war, people learn not to ask questions unless the answers mattered. Lucas looked up at him. Really looked this time. The American did not seem like the pictures from posters. No hard eyes. No cruel grin. Just tired. Human. His uniform smelled like rain, wool, and coffee. Strange how ordinary it felt. Lucas swallowed. The question had been building in him since the doorway, since the towel, since the water, since the soup. It sat heavy in his chest until it finally came out. Why? Walker looked at him. Why what? Lucas lowered his eyes. Why help me? The room seemed quieter after that. Even the stove crackled softer. Walker turned the coffee cup slowly in his hands, thinking. It was a simple question. But simple questions carried heavy answers. Finally, he spoke. Because you are 13. Lucas frowned slightly, not understanding. Walker looked at him, and continued. And because being young in a war is not your fault. Lucas stared at him. The words landed slowly. Not like orders. Like truth. Walker nodded toward the empty bowl. And because everybody deserves hot food when they are hungry. Lucas looked down at the table again, his clean hands resting there. Clean hands? Warm hands. For the first time in months, they did not look like survivors' hands. Just hands. A boy's hands. The nurse returned and placed something beside him. Folded clothes. American Army surplus. Clean shirt. Wool socks. Trousers a little too big. Lucas stared at them. For me? He asked. The nurse smiled. For tonight. Walker stood up and pushed the chair back under the table. There is a shelter room downstairs. Warm beds. You can sleep there. Sleep in a bed. Lucas had not heard those words directed at him in months. He looked at Walker, then at the folded clothes, then at the towel over his shoulders. So many small things. Water. Soap. Soup. Clothes. A chair by the stove. None of them grand. None of them heroic. But together, they felt bigger than anything the war had given him. Lucas looked at the American soldier and understood something he had never been taught. Sometimes the end of fear did not come with peace treaties or flags. Sometimes it began with one stranger deciding to be kind. That night, Lucas slept in a real bed for the first time in almost 6 months. It was not much. A narrow army cot in the basement shelter of the schoolhouse. A wool blanket. A thin pillow. Pipes overhead humming softly with heat moving through the building. But to Lucas, it felt like luxury. He lay awake at first, staring at the ceiling in the dark, listening to the strange sounds of safety. Not sirens. Not boots in the street. Just breathing. Other people sleeping nearby. The distant rattle of dishes being washed upstairs. Water running through pipes. Water. He kept thinking about it. The heat of it on his skin. The way the dirt had disappeared into the drain like the months behind him were being carried away. He lifted his hands in the dark and touched his own arms, still half expecting to feel the rough layer of grime. But his skin was smooth now. Clean. Real. Sometime after midnight he fell asleep. Deeply. The kind of sleep that comes only when the body believes it is safe. In the morning, sunlight slipped through the basement window in pale strips across the floor. Lucas woke to warmth, not cold. For one confused second, he forgot where he was. Then he smelled breakfast upstairs. Bread warming. Coffee. Soup again. His stomach answered before his mind did. When he climbed the stairs, Thomas Walker was by the front door, checking supply crates. Same uniform. Same tired eyes. But Lucas noticed something now he had missed before. The soldier looked less like a stranger in daylight. More like a man from a farm. Like someone who knew early mornings and hard weather. Walker looked up. Sleep all right? Lucas nodded. Yes. Walker tossed him a small wrapped package. Lucas caught it awkwardly. Inside was half a bar of soap. Used but still good. Lucas looked at it, confused. Walker shrugged. Keep it. Such a small thing. But Lucas held it carefully, like it was expensive. Maybe it was. Not because of what it cost. Because of what it meant. Years later, Lucas Adler would remember that morning more clearly than the day the war officially ended. Not the uniforms. Not the ruined streets. Not even the hunger. He remembered steam. Warm towels. Soup in a chipped bowl. A soldier who asked nothing from him and gave him dignity anyway. In time, Lucas grew up. He apprenticed with a plumber in Frankfurt, learning pipes, boilers, water systems. Strange, perhaps, that a boy changed by water would spend his life making sure it reached other people. He married. Had children. Built a small house with strong walls and warm radiators in every room. And every winter, when his children stayed too long in the bath and the hot water bill climbed higher than it should, Lucas never complained. He would only smile quietly when his wife rolled her eyes and said, "They have been in there forever." Because Lucas understood something they did not. Hot water was never just water. It was warmth. Safety. Proof that life could be ordinary again. And once, when he was an old man, his grandson asked him why he always kept that tiny half-used bar of soap in his dresser drawer, wrapped in paper like treasure. Lucas held it in his hand for a long moment and said, "Because one day, when the world felt cold, a stranger reminded me that warmth still existed. And perhaps that is what saved him in the end. Not the water itself. Not the soup. Not the bed. But the simple, quiet truth behind them. That even after war, kindness could still survive. And sometimes, kindness was enough to make a boy believe in tomorrow again."